Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host. I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. And today we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to my heart as a writer, which is about words and the meaning of words and how we use words and the impact of the words we use and why it's important. But before we get there, I'd like to remind everybody who might be watching, no matter where they are in the world, or whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, go into the live chat or the comments. And if you want to, let me know where in the world you're connecting from. I'll get that shout out on screen. And of course, if you have any questions about the topic that you'd like to ask me or comments about anything that I might have said, you can also put those in the live chat or in the comments, and I will discuss them during the course of today's episode. And then finally, before we begin, I want to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is in fact supported by members of The Chocolate Life. If you're not a member, I'd appreciate your going over there, becoming a member. There's always a free membership tier, and then putting a like on this video and subscribing to the Pod Save Chocolate channel. So if you are watching today, I have up on the screen the homepage of TheChocolateLife.com right now, and it is live. You can go there and follow along. For every single episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post, and here is the post for today's episode. And in this post, I will give an overview of what it is that I'm talking about, and if there are links that I'm going to refer to, I'm going to put the links on this page as well. So if you're listening to this in audio podcast form, or you're in your workshop and you're listening to this on YouTube, you can go back later and you can go and review all of the sources that I put together for today's episode. And with that, I'm going to jump in and immediately start to talk about today's topic, which is defining specialty, defining craft, and other terms which are important within the worlds of cocoa and chocolate for those of us who are interested in chocolate. We're chocolate fans, whether we're chocolate makers, chocolatiers, or we're just lovers of chocolate. And the impetus for today's episode started off with two posts on social media. So if we scroll down, right, to the episode overview, the first thing I say is words inform beliefs, beliefs inform actions, and action have consequences. And this is why I personally think that the words we choose to use are important, because the meaning of the words and the way we accept them and the way we reflect them and the way we talk about them and the way they change the way we act does have consequences in the real world. And that's really the point of today's episode, is to talk through some of these issues and how I approach these things, so that what you can do is you can take these ideas, if you find them interesting, right, and apply them to the way that you think about the words you use and how you will communicate about the work you're doing to your customers, to members of the press, to your employees, if you have any, right? Because there is a truism in organizational development which says, that there should be the outside reflection of an organization should be consistent with the internal culture. And so we want to make sure that we're using the words internally so that we reflect them externally to our customers in a consistent kind of way. And so the first post that got me thinking about this topic for today was in the r/chocolate subreddit on Reddit, and it's associated with this image. Right. And this image shows a series of steps from a whole cocoa pod to a cocoa pod that is cut in half, showing fresh, an entire, I don't know what we call that, the entire set of seeds that's sitting on a placenta. I don't know if it actually has a name, but we've got all the seeds sitting on a placenta. Next to that, we have dried beans. To the next to that, we have shell, which looks like it has been removed from beans. Then we have beans, and then we have nibs and a chocolate bar. And what this image does is says the average pod weighs this much, the average mucilage around the seeds weighs this much. And the challenge for this episode or for this image was that in talking about this, and there is a link to the actual post. If you're on Reddit, you can go find it, is that they use the word husk in two different contexts. So they use the word cacao pod husk and then cocoa husk, right, to refer to the shell. And so I'm going back and forth, and I'm trying to answer the question that the OP, the original poster, has. And I realize that what we're doing is that we're using the word husk to refer to two different things. And I'm answering the question one way, and they're thinking about the question in another way. And so we're talking past one another. And it wasn't until we were able to go, oh, we're actually using the word husk to mean different things, that I was able to step back and I think, okay, now I think I know the answer to your question. And so when we think about the way words are used, I think one of the most important things is that there's a consensus. We have a mutual understanding about the meaning of words we're using. And unless we have this mutual understanding, we may end up talking past each other. And that experience over the course of a couple of posts back and forth, comments back and forth in this post in the r/chocolate subreddit, really sort of catapulted my thinking about this. Sort of said, yeah, I think I want to go and think about this a little bit more. And so I'm going to jump around the page, but there was a post on LinkedIn by Sharon Terenzi, right, which was about the same day, I think, if I recall. The audio is not playing because I'm not sharing the audio from this tab, but the questions that Sharon asked is, should machines be included in the definition of craft chocolate? Or is the final quality of chocolate the only thing that matters? And so this goes to another really, really important point for me, which is that I'm looking for so applying Occam's razor. And Occam's razor is not necessarily that the simplest formation of a question is likely to be the most correct one. Occam's razor says what we shouldn't do is we shouldn't conflate issues, right? So we don't need to, we could restate that as the argument which makes the fewest unnecessary assumptions, right, is the one that we should gravitate towards first, right? And so in this particular case, what Sharon is doing is to say, should we take an idea which is about machines, and should we make machines a part of the definition of what craft is? And so we're conflating two entirely different ideas. And I don't think that what we should do, it's my opinion, and that's what I'm talking through today, and you can agree with me or not agree with me, and let me know if you agree with me or don't agree with me, is that what do the machines we're using to make a chocolate have to do with a definition of craft? And can we come to a definition of craft which doesn't require any conflated assumptions that enables us to talk about what craft means in a meaningful way without adding things like, oh, in order for it to be craft chocolate, it must be quality, right? And at that point, we're in a whole other universe, because what do we mean when we use the word quality? As I've discussed many times in the past here, quality is a basket of attributes. Every single one of us has this basket, but we have different attributes in the basket, and even if we have the same attributes in our baskets, we might value those attributes differently. And so before we're going to conflate craft and quality, we need to have a good definition of what quality means, independent of the word craft. And I'm doing this because it's this clarity that I'm looking for, right? It's this, if we can both agree on what these words mean, then when we speak to each other, we know that we're talking about the same thing. But if my definition of craft doesn't include the definition of quality, and your definition of craft does include this definition of quality, then when we start talking, we may not be talking about the same thing, right? Now, this is also something that I spoke about in the September newsletter. So if you are a member of The Chocolate Life, you will get every month a newsletter. If you are a free member, and this is the September newsletter. And in that newsletter, I talked about this concept. In the blog thoughts section, I did a couple of episodes around fermentation with one of them with Bertusescus, and we went through there and talked about what specialty might mean, and how specialty or is going to be different, or fine in flavor, specialty, fine in flavor being synonymous, right, with commodity cocoa. And so, but I do want to point out is that if you're not a member of the Chocolate Life, what you do is if you go to this page, you're going to get a little notice that says the majority of this page is for subscribers only. And so I just wanted to point that out, that there is a difference. I'm logged into my account, and so I'm showing you the entire page here. So before I run into the next thing that I want to talk about, I want to give a quick shout out to Mike King at Encore Coffee in Kansas City. So happy Red Friday from Kansas City. It's a Kansas City Chiefs thing. Mike says, yeah, I know that the dominant color in the Kansas City trade dress is in fact red, so that makes an enormous amount of sense. And I don't know, you got a home game this weekend, Mike? I'm not certain, but let us know. But thanks for connecting in today. And I know that you have a regular participant in the Craft Chocolate Challenge. And so what are your thoughts about, what the definition of craft is and how you use it? Go into the comments and let me know what it is that you think. Right. So I did post the link to this episode over on Reddit in a different subreddit, so the r/chocolate making subreddit, and that r/chocolate making subreddit is where this image showed up. It just happened to show up in my feed, and so I responded to it, and so I'm doing it. And somebody pointed out to me, which is making chocolate can be an art form, and trying to pigeonhole the creative process with literal definitions can be counterproductive to the undertaking. And so there are a couple of things there. So, we have a back and forth here. I think it's just the two of us who are going back and forth here. There are a couple of things to think about here. The first one of which is that, yes, making chocolate can be an art form. But I would say that if you want to be good at being a chocolate maker, that what you have to do is you have to understand the physics of it, the chemistry of what it is that you're doing. And understand the process and the interaction of process steps, right? And that's a technical understanding of what's going on. But all of those things are informed by the artistic intention of the maker. So I may be looking to, I may have an idea. For example, I'm only going to make 2-ingredient chocolate. Right. And when I make my 2-ingredient chocolate, I'm only going to use an organic sugar, which is not fully refined. Right. And so the chocolate that I make does have an art component in the sense that I'm choosing the beans, I'm choosing the ingredients. Right. Those things are all informed by the technical process. So in this particular case, I don't necessarily agree with the person here that making chocolate is only an art form. And number one, I'm not trying to pigeonhole the creative process, right? The creative process is what it is that you go through. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to come to clarity of expression around the way chocolate maker A speaks to chocolate maker B, right? So that when they speak, right, they're talking about the same things. And more importantly, when you're talking with people who are your customers, for example, or the people with whom you trade, whether you're buying beans from them or some other ingredients, that you're also talking about the same things the same way. And that's not the same thing as pigeonholing the creative expression, which for me, I think that's really, really important to point out. But this was, something that came up in the last 24 hours after I posted this in the chocolate making, the chocolate making subreddit. So, and it turns out that r/chocolate and the chocolate making subreddit are the two subreddits that I contribute to most. And so if you're interested in following along, please do. There are some interesting conversations there. But for example, this morning, one of the posts in the r/chocolate subreddit, let me see if I can go there, was, is white chocolate really chocolate? And, is there a debate? No, there's not. So we get a lot of stuff. We got a lot of stuff like that, but it can be a fascinating topic to discuss too. A quick going back to Mike at Encore. I classify myself as a specialty coffee and chocolate company. Bean to bar is a manufacturing process, not a product descriptor. All right, Mike, absolutely. And I wanna go and talk about those things right now because I think it's really important. So the term bean to bar, as it is associated with chocolate making, was coined in 1996 or 1997 by John Scharfenberger and Robert Steinberg of Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker. And they originally coined the term as a way to differentiate themselves to big chocolate, big industrial makers. And I think more specifically, what they were doing compared with Valrhona. I may be reading into things there. But what they did is they took this term, bean to bar, and they added a whole bunch of terms on top of it. So bean to bar means we are using higher quality beans. Bean to bar means a bunch of other things. So if you want to bean to bar, you need to be interested. Number one is, you need to own the equipment. All the steps need to be done in-house. On your equipment, you're doing all the process from bringing in beans and finishing with chocolate bars. And it turns out that if you look at this as a process descriptor, which is one of the things you say, Mike, it's just a process descriptor. Anybody who buys in beans, right, and transforms those beans into finished bars of chocolates call themselves a bean to bar chocolate maker, can legitimately call themselves a bean to bar chocolate maker. It's only when we start conflating other concepts with the phrase bean to bar that we run into an issue. And one of the reasons why that's important is if you walk into your local drugstore and they have an end cap display with Lindt and Ghirardelli chocolate bars. The reason why I mentioned that is Lindt owns Ghirardelli, and they tend to own the end caps in a lot of stores. Is that if you look at the Ghirardelli label, one of the things that they will say there is proudly bean to bar, our commitment to ultimate quality. And so if you are a small chocolate maker, the phrase bean to bar has been co-opted by Big Chocolate, and it means less, right? And it's confusing to the consumer. The consumer will go in and say, wow, Ghirardelli is bean to bar, and it's only $4 for 100 grams. And if it's on sale, it's under $3 per 100 grams. Why should I pay $12 or $16 or $18 for a bean to bar chocolate? They're the same thing, aren't they? Right? And so this is why we need to be careful about definitions. Is that if we create a definition that is sloppy, if we create a definition, sloppy is the wrong word, if we create a definition that has too many dependent ideas associated with it, then what we do is, in addition to, two professionals talking to each other might not be talking about the same thing, right? But what we might be doing is actually creating confusion for the customer if somebody goes and uses the term differently from the way we want it to be used. And so, one of the things that I think was just interesting to do is to go and say, okay, let's do a quick search on the internet, and what does the internet think? And so so I use an AI-assisted search engine called Perplexity, right? And I don't actually know what the underlying language model is. It could be ChatGPT. One of the reasons why I use it compared with Google and other AI-assisted search engines now is that I can save a history. And so within one page of search requests, I might have 3 or 4 or 5 simultaneous or sequential search requests, and I can keep them all in one page and go from one to the next. So it's much easier to use if every single search request is on a different page and I need to navigate back and forth between pages. That's why I use it. So I just want to let you know that's why. So I asked, what is bean to bar chocolate? So that's pretty cool. And among other things, it says, oh, there's a Wikipedia entry to it. That's really, really nice. It pulled from Bantu Chocolate and Bean to Bar World, and there are a bunch of other resources that it pulled from and a bunch of images. So what it says is the definition of bean to bar chocolate. And this is, if somebody is just doing a random search on the internet, this is likely to be an example of what it is that they'll find. Bean to bar chocolate refers to chocolate made by a manufacturer who controls the entire process from sourcing cocoa beans to creating the final chocolate product. the manufacturer handles all the steps, including roasting, grinding, and tempering the chocolate. So we have a process definition. I don't agree 100% with this definition, because what it does is that it says that the bean-to-bar chocolate maker must control the sourcing of cocoa beans. And there are very, very few bean-to-bar chocolate makers, right? Or small chocolate makers who actually control the sourcing of beans. Normally what you're doing is you're buying, whether you might be buying through Cocoa Supply or you're buying from some other brokerage firm, that you're not controlling the sourcing at all. And as a matter of fact, you're dependent upon those intermediaries to get the beans from the farm gate to your factory. So not all. So this is a definition which is close to the one, right, that Micah said. It's a process definition. The manufacturer controls, right, the process, right, handling all of the steps, including roasting, grinding, and tempering the chocolate. There are other ones, right, and they're doing it. But the important thing is control there and supervision. I am supervising all of the steps, right? I'm starting from beans, and so that's the bean to bar. I'm starting from beans. I'm ending up with bars, but I'm supervising all of the processes. Now, one of the interesting questions here that, this is 17 years later and people are still debating this question, is, does controlling mean that I have to do all the work in a factory building that I own? So if I'm Cho, for example, they send their chocolate maker to the producing country and they oversee, roasting and grinding into liquor, and then send the liquor back to their facility in Oakland, Emeryville, I think, and they finish the chocolate there. So are they bean to bar because they're controlling, they're supervising the entire process? So I think we need to be open to that possibility, that within the context of bean to bar, that's okay. It's not that, okay, I need to transport all the beans from wherever they are in the world to my place and I'm going to make the chocolate there. I don't think we need to do that. So it says the bean to bar movement emerged around 2010. That's not correct. 1997. So it's way off. And so this is a place where misinformation gets to be perpetuated on the internet. If I don't know anything about the history, I might look at this and I would get a bad idea. So here's where I have problems with this definition of bean to bar, right? Is that we have a bunch of conflating assumptions that are made. And this is where we need to take Occam's razor and go, nope, this is not a part of the definition. So key characteristics of bean to bar is that it is made in small batches. No, I can be bean to bar and I can make them on a continuous production line. I don't need to make in small batches, not at all. Often uses single origin cocoa beans. If I'm, Ghirardelli, am I blending my cocoa beans? Maybe I'm using from West Africa, but it could be a mix of Ghanaian, Ivorian cocoa beans. And so I'd say, no, conflating the definition with bean to bar with single origin, not necessarily. Focuses on quality and unique flavors. Well, if I am an industrial chocolate maker, I'll come back to industrial in just a little while because I think there's a better term for it, right? So the focus is on quality and unique flavors. If I'm Ghirardelli and I'm making, a 70% bittersweet chocolate bar, am I focusing on unique flavors? Maybe not, right? So I don't think we say we can't conflate focuses on quality and unique flavors. They're not a part of the definition. It's not a part of the process, right? Necessarily. Typically contains minimal ingredients. So what we're doing is we're talking about 2-ingredient and 3-ingredient chocolate. No, if I start with beans and I end up with bars, why am I not using lecithin? Why am I not using vanilla? There's nothing, I don't need to conflate these things, right? Emphasizes ethical sourcing and sustainability. If I'm Big Chocolate, right, I'm Mars, I'm Mondelez, I might be making, I might have a subsidiary that does bean to bar, Calabout might be doing bean to bar chocolate manufacturing, right? But is ethical sourcing or are ethical sourcing and sustainability part of the definition of bean to bar? And the answer is not. They're extrinsic. They're not a part of the definition. Differences from mass-produced chocolate, more control over flavor development. This is where I have to disagree, is that if I am a big industrial is a word we use, commodity is the word I really want to use, right? So if I am a big, technified chocolate maker, right? I understand, roasting parameters and chemistry and all this other kind of stuff really, really well, right? What happens is that the industrial maker will have more control, right, over flavor development, right? Because the key understanding, the key thing that makes a commodity chocolate maker or an industrial chocolate maker um, what they are is that they start out with the end goal in mind. If I start out with the end goal in mind, I have an existing recipe, and what I need to do is I need to make sure that the next time I make the recipe, it is exactly the same as the last time I made the recipe. I would say they need to have a lot more control over things than a small batch chocolate maker like Encore, like Mike, because when he starts a batch, from the beginning, he's looking at, what flavor potential is there in the beans, and he doesn't have necessarily thinking about controlling over flavor development to make it taste exactly the same. He recognizes that his beans will taste different from harvest to harvest to harvest, and so he's going to necessarily come up with a different product, and he's okay with that. And so I think that when we talk about the difference between what makes an industrial maker or a commodity maker, is that what they're doing is they're starting out with the end goal in mind, and they need to have control over all of the technical aspects of flavor development and rheology and pH, right? And all of the other technical aspects of the product that they're making. So does bean to bar always have higher quality ingredients? Doesn't need to be, right? Does bean to bar always mean greater transparency in sourcing and production? Not necessarily. There are a bunch of small makers who are not very transparent about their sourcing practices, usually more expensive due to smaller batch production. Well, bean to bar, no, if I can be an industrial maker like your Ardelli, right, it's inexpensive, right, compared with small batch production. And so this is something to consider. But this is a definition of bean to bar, right? That, just on a search engine, and somebody might go, bean to bar always means these things. Now, as small chocolate makers, as specialty chocolate makers, right, we'd like this to be true. We would like these things to be true. But unfortunately, as I say, the definition is so vague that big chocolate has co-opted it. And we can't always do that. We can't always use that definition. So what is craft chocolate? So number one, craft chocolate refers to a specialized approach to chocolate making that emphasizes quality, flavor, and artisanal techniques. The movement began in the 1990s, yay, so somehow craft chocolate began before bean to bar chocolate, which, from my understanding of the history, and I was there during this time, is incorrect. And it started to gain significant traction in 2005 to 2007, which I would say is about right. That we started the explosion of small chocolate makers in that time frame. So craft chocolate is bean to bar process. And this is where, all chocolate making is from beans. If you're not a bean to bar chocolate maker, you're a nib to bar chocolate maker, you're a liquor to bar chocolate maker, you might be a powder to bar chocolate maker, but that would be really, really expensive. So craft chocolate is bean to bar, all chocolate, if we want to talk about it, is bean to bar. So I don't think that's a good way of starting off this definition. All craft chocolate is small batch. If we add the definition of batch size into the definition for craft, we now need to start placing limits on this, which is, if it's related to batch size, what is the largest small batch that we can use? Is it a 100 kilogram melanger? Is it a 35 kilogram ball mill? Is it a 500 kilogram universal? Right? Can I be a craft chocolate maker? Right? And if I am, and this is where the connection to the question that Sharon Terenzi asks, are we going to start adding the machines into this? So is it craft chocolate if it's made in a ball mill? Can I make craft chocolate if it's made in a ball mill, if I'm using a ball mill? Can I make craft chocolate if I'm using a universal? Right? Is the only way to make craft chocolate in a melanger? Right? So and the answer to the question is, why are we saying that you can only make craft chocolate in a particular kind of machine? Right? There's no correlation between those things. And then if we are going to start conflating these issues, then what is the largest small batch you could mean? And this is something that, I have a challenge with in some of the awards programs. So they've got the difference between micro batch and small batch, and how big is a micro batch, and where's the cutoff between micro batch, right, and other batches. And this confusion shows up in definitions, and I link to these definitions in the post for today's. So in a 2017 article that was posted on the FCCI website, written by Dr. Carla Martin, she talks about specialty cacao and specialty chocolate makers. So the definition for specialty cacao is cacao that is produced with craftsmanship and intention. So there's a craft element to specialty, which is a weird overlap, right? And intention, right? So specialty cocoa is intentionally produced in order to be able to receive a higher price than commodity or bulk cocoa, right? Specialty cocoa production is based on a notion of quality that is linked to lack of defects and the presence of fine flavor and aromas. And so this is an interesting thing, because the ICCO definition of specialty cocoa is linked to this notion of lack of defects and the presence of fine flavor aromas. And so what we can do is we can say, okay, specialty cacao, specialty cocoa is one that has, right, lower defects, fewer defects, right, and that it has the capability of producing chocolate that has lots of interesting flavors in it. So it produces more than just plain chocolate flavor. It's got fruits, flowers, nuts, spices, all of these kinds of things that we appreciate in a chocolate. And so we can go, I would simplify this definition by getting rid of the intention to get a higher price component, right? So while that is certainly the case, right, in some cases that, okay, I am a farmer, I'm a cooperative, I know that I'm using certain genetics. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use these genetics and specialized post-harvest processing in order to take these higher quality genetics and produce something which is going to give us better than commodity chocolate flavors, right? But one of the things that we learned, or we discussed with Bertusescus on the fermentation, the innovative fermentations, is that it is possible to ferment many cocoa beans, right, and produce lots of interesting flavors from them. And it's true. I mean, Ecuador, in its ICCO report, says that 75% of exports out of Ecuador are cacao fino y de aroma. They're fine and flavor cocoa. That's the official, last time I looked, the official percentage of exports in Ecuador that were considered to be fine flavored chocolate. But the bulk of that is CCN 51. Right? So, CCN 51 by the fine and flavor chocolate community is not generally considered to be a cacao fino bean. And so we have to reconcile that. So I would take intention out of this, right? Because it's not necessary. It's using Occam's razor. It's an assumption that we can just carve away, right? And what we can say is that specialty cacao is cacao that delivers, right, specialty flavors. And I know that's using specialty in the recursive way makes no sense, but specialty cacao compared with commodity cacao, right? Specialty cacao can deliver other than straightforward chocolate flavors. Commodity cacao only delivers straightforward chocolate flavors. And now we have a definition for commodity or bulk cacao that is synonymous, Mike, and this is why I like you bringing up coffee, right, in the way you describe yourself, is that this begins to mimic the way the entire specialty coffee industry thinks about itself. A specialty coffee beverage is made from specialty coffee beans. And a specialty coffee bean is one that has received a grading score, I believe it's above 80, by qualified Q graders, right? And it's very simple. That's very, very simple. It doesn't say anything about genetics. It doesn't say anything about the origin. It doesn't say anything about any kind of post-harvest processes with respect to fermentation and drying. It just talks about the potential of the bean, right? And that's the simplest definition we can get to. Specialty cacao, right, is a cocoa bean that can produce, right, flavor profiles in the finished chocolate, right, which are more complicated than just simple chocolate. Now, I, as the maker, get to determine what those flavors are. I can take the beans and do lots of things with them, right? And two makers can have the same beans from the same harvest, from the same farm, and create very different chocolates from them. That's the artistic part of it, right? So there is that intention part. But specialty cacao, right, and commodity or bulk cacao can be defined in a way that is consistent with the way the coffee industry thinks about itself. And that's great because now there is a common touch point, a common use of language that we can discuss and say, when I say specialty, this is what I mean, right? And this is what you mean, and that's great. So yeah. Right. So this definition, again, I put the link to where the page where that I found these definitions. So it's Sizing the Craft Chocolate Market. It's on the FCCI website. Hopefully it'll get there. Yay. So the definitions were taken by this page. And I want to thank the Chocolate Life member who pointed me the link to this page as a response to the September member newsletter. But let's go back to this. A specialty chocolate maker, manufacturer. So a specialty chocolate manufacturer is a bean-to-bar chocolate maker. I would think that most chocolate makers work bean-to-bar, so putting bean-to-bar there is redundant, right? So, what am I? I'm, just, this is part of the challenge with bean-to-bar. It's, again, 17 years in, we're still having arguments about what bean-to-bar means. We need to move on. Right? If we're having this argument nearly 20 years into the movement, there's something just wrong, right? And this is one of the reasons why I think these conversations are so important, is we need to get past this basic definitional stuff, which is, if we as chocolate makers are confused, no wonder our customers are confused. Really, really important, right? So a specialty chocolate maker is a bean-to-bar chocolate maker working with mostly specialty cacao. Why equivocating? Why don't we just say a specialty chocolate maker works with specialty beans? Why is it mostly specialty beans? Like, why are we equivocating there? All right. So I don't understand, because it brings all this, like, how do I, if I'm a specialty chocolate maker, how do I differentiate between the chocolate I make with specialty beans as opposed to non-special commodity beans? It just confuses things, right? If we use that definition. And right, uses less than or equal to 200 metric tons of cacao annually. So I'm a specialty chocolate maker, but if I use 201 metric tons, I'm assuming this is less than or equal to. So if I use 201 metric tons, I no longer qualify as a specialty maker. That makes no sense to me. And by the way, if you were to look at a company like Bona, right, Bona makes, I believe last time I spoke with Elisa Stefan, they were using 50% more, something like this, than this 200 metric ton limit. And would we no longer consider Bona to be a specialty chocolate maker? And the answer is no, right? And here's, this is exactly like batch size. Like, how did we decide who decided and how do we decide? Because I didn't decide this, right? So how was the decision made? The 200 metric tons was the cutoff. We don't need to go there, right? Right. What we want to do, I believe, and this is the point that I'm making, is that the simple definition, right, is that a specialty chocolate is made from specialty cocoa, right? Yay! That this is something we already do in coffee, so it makes sense. There's a widespread understanding, and now two very big communities can talk to each other in a way that they both understand. We know it in specialty coffee. What we're doing is we're looking for beans that produce more nuanced, right, and perhaps broader flavor profiles. It's not just a plain coffee flavor, but there's all this other stuff. I'm looking for a Panamanian geisha. I'm looking for an Ethiopian mokadahima. There's lots of really interesting flavors that are in there. Yes, they are bought out by fermentation. They're bought out by other, where the beans are grown. They're a part of it. But we're really focusing is on the potential of the coffee beans to deliver more than right? A basic coffee flavor, right? And the same thing is true of cocoa, I believe, right? A specialty cocoa is a cocoa that is capable of delivering, right, more than just straightforward cocoa and chocolate flavor. And we do have a program that is working on sort of defining what that means, right? Which is the Cacao of Excellence and their standard. So if you have won an award in the Cacao of Excellence, then you are by definition a specialty cocoa bean. Yay! So that's it. So it is this logical progression of terms. The progression of terms is consistent, and it doesn't make any unnecessary assumptions, right, in terms of putting it together. And I think that's really, really important. So if I'm talking about specialty coffee, I could talk about specialty cocoa in exactly the same way, and we understand what specialty means. This is why it's important to do this, right? And I think it's really important. So I don't agree with either of these definitions. Now, again, these are from 2017, and thinking on them by FCCI may have matured since then, right? I don't know the answer to that question, right? But I presented it here for you because these are the things that you find on the internet, right? And if we're going to find them on the internet, we need to be able to deal with them in a comprehensive way. So, right. So this is Mark. Blue Spruce Chocolates. I don't know if Yuri is with you today. Hopefully it's a lovely day in Kittredge, Colorado. Specialty cannot be defined by the size or type of the equipment. If I upgrade my Melanger, I'm no longer specialty. Mark, you've hit it on the head, right? So this is why I have problems or challenges with the current notion of adding assumptions on top of what a base definition might be, right? So the moment you say, if you use more than 20 tons of bean a year or 30 tons of beans, you're no longer specialty, right? If you work in a 100 kilogram Melanger, that's okay, but if you work in a 140 kilogram Melanger or some other machines, you're no longer specialty. No, right? So thanks for pointing it out. I agree with you. We're on the same page with that, right? So Mike at Encore says chocolate also needs to implement a Q-type grading program. So, Mike, I would agree with you, and I think the Cacao of Excellence is as close as we're going to get to that, right? Because there is a direct connection between there's not a direct. There's a much closer connection between coffee beans and roasting and the beverage which is made from those coffee beans, right? We can, in a cupping, right, there are, standards about, how the coffee is ground and temperature and all this other kind of stuff that I can do it. So there's a set of standards. We don't have those standards, so there's no cupping equivalent in cocoa beans. And it's not clear to me that taking a cocoa bean, roasting it, and then putting it into hot water, which can be done to sort of evaluate some of the aromas, right, in the bean, makes sense for coffee. You need to add sugar, right? You need to transform the cocoa bean into chocolate and evaluate the bean, right? Because the fat is going to have an effect on the way the volatile aromas are experienced in the mouth. I mean, it's really, really important about that we do that. Not certain why we slowed down here, but I apologize. I have a hardwired connection into my internet router at the moment, so not certain. We do need something like a Q grading system, and right now the Cacao of Excellence, which is also being very, very closely shadowed by the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Fund project. They use similar approaches. Not surprisingly, the same people are involved, or many of the same people are involved, right? But yes, we need to have a program which says this is a specialty cocoa bean. And right now, the closest thing we have is the Cacao of Excellence program. And I am all in on suggesting that this is the approach that should be used. Unfortunately, I have to take the cocoa bean, I have to roast it, I have to transform it into chocolate and then evaluate it based on the chocolate, not based on the beans. So it's that there is that difference. There is that extra set of steps which needs to go through, but I agree with you completely. Then we also have back, hey, Mark, congrats on awards. So, Mark, is this International Chocolate Awards in the Americas round? Let us know. I'm like, if you won something, put it in the chat and we'll get it up on screen and we'll say congrats and all other kind of stuff. Right. So, just wanted to go there. So, another place where I want to think about the use of words is around the word ethical, right? So when we talk about ethical or ethics, what does that mean? Right? So ethics are a social construct. So ethics is what a group, whether it is a society or, for example, a company, these are our ethics. These are the principles by which we operate, right? Morals represent an individual's interpretation and implementation of those ethics. So, for example, if I were to say that I want to think about ethics as very simply do no harm, which is, I think, the place I want to start from, at least the place I want to suggest we start from. If I talk about ethical this or ethical that, I think that the place to start is do no harm, right? And so if I think about ethics in terms of sourcing, so ethical sourcing, what does that mean to me? And this is where this going from ethics to morals, although people use the terms interchangeably, I don't think that they are interchangeable in that respect, but we use them that way commonly. So I might say that ethical sourcing means that nobody takes unfair advantage of a trading partner. So if I'm involved in ethical sourcing, it means that I am not trying to take advantage, for example, of a position of a power imbalance, right? So I'm a multi-billion-dollar company and you're an individual smallholder farmer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of that power imbalance and I'm going to try to get a better price for me and a worse price for you. So I could say that's what ethical sourcing means, right? You, as somebody else, might say, well, that definition doesn't encompass enough things. Because for me, ethical sourcing also means that the cacao must be produced ethically. And what does that mean? It might mean that it's sustainable. And now what we've done is, okay, we have to have a definition of sustainable in order to be able to put ethical and sustainable and make them relate with each other. And that's fine. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. And everybody does it all the time. But what do we mean by sustainable? What does sustainable mean, right? And it's okay to have a definition for sustainable that is sort of outside the mainstream, but you need to be very, very careful about how you go about and talk about it. And so if I go back to this definition of bean to bar, we have this Bantu chocolate, and they talk about artisan and how artisan chocolates are made. I'm not entirely sure why Bantu chocolate shows up in all of these things, but the major differences would be bean to bar and tree to bar, right? And so again, here is a challenge where we have two different concepts, bean to bar. So in this particular definition, right, cocoa grew bean, that's where you get the bean to bar, right? But why is some chocolate labeled bean to bar, right? So what does all that mean? So bean to bar chocolate is chocolate made by the same manufacturer starting from the bean. Okay. If I adopt that definition, what that means is that Barry Callebaut is a bean to bar chocolate maker. Ghirardelli is a bean to bar chocolate maker. So there's no definition. But this excludes chocolate from intermediate products like cocoa powder, cocoa liquor, or things made from another manufacturer. Absolutely. I agree with those things. In broader terms, bean to bar chocolate is a movement championed by artisan or craft chocolate makers. Okay, so what is the difference between artisan and craft? That's another thing. Those are not defined terms. So that is those who make chocolate in small batches as opposed to mass production. So here's what we're doing is, again, we're conflating terms. And if somebody goes to the Bantu website and likes that, but they go to another website and they have conflicting definitions, there's confusion. So what I want to be very, very careful about right now is to talk about a way to think about craft, right? and craft as opposed to what, right? So we've already talked about industrial chocolate, which I also think of as commodity chocolate. And why I want to use commodity chocolate is going back to the coffee definition, right? A commodity coffee is a coffee that is made from a commodity coffee beverage is one that is made from commodity coffee beans, right? So we have this specialty coffee relationship that's really, really easy to understand. A commodity coffee bean is any bean that's really only capable of producing straightforward coffee flavors with none of this extra nuance that connoisseurs or fans like. And so we have this parallel in chocolate. I have a commodity chocolate manufacturer, right, is one that uses commodity chocolate beans. A specialty chocolate maker is one that uses specialty chocolate beans. It doesn't say anything about the size of batches or the size of manufacturers. Commodity, that's what it is, right? That's the simplest, most straightforward definition, right? Now, it could be that a commodity chocolate maker also has a line where they're making craft chocolate. But what does craft chocolate mean? So let's go back to this understanding. A commodity chocolate maker, an industrial chocolate maker, starts out with the end goal in mind, right? So they are making a chocolate that their customers, whether it's a retail customer or an industrial customer, so a reseller who's going to take the chocolate and make something else with it, right? They're expecting the flavor to be the same from batch to batch to batch. And they don't care how the commodity maker does it. They just want to know that the flavor is going to be the same. They also want to make sure that the rheology, the flow characteristic, the fluidity of the chocolate is the same. And one of the reasons why is if you're running an enrobing line where you're doing 2,000 pieces an hour, you don't want to have to go and readjust the tempering and all the other aspects of this process of the machine in order to say, well, the chocolate's a little thicker this time. And you can't do that, right? If I'm using the chocolate in a recipe which has a leavening agent, I want to make sure that the pH is the same from batch to batch to batch. And so the definition of a commodity maker, right, is that they're looking to, they start off with the end goal in mind. And everything that they do in the manufacturing process is to achieve this consistent end goal, right? And it's the simplest, straightforward, in my mind, way to think about it. And it's a way to differentiate the craft chocolate maker. So what is the craft chocolate maker all about, right? So the craft chocolate maker says, I have some beans in front of me. And sometimes every single bag of beans, right? But sometimes it's every single batch of beans from a producer in a given harvest represents a unique potential. It's a unique flavor potential. And my goal as the chocolate maker is to express this potential through my lens. My lens is a creative person. And so what we can do is we can talk about the difference between commodity and craft as simply one of intent, right? And commodity is about the end goal is what we're going to hit every single time. And the craft maker says, I'm less concerned about consistency and always hitting the same goal. I'm more concerned about, ooh, this is a fun flavor. I want to see, I want to get this flavor. I want to share this excitement with my customers. And I think that's a really, really good way to talk about this. It doesn't include batch size. It doesn't include machinery. It doesn't include genetics. It doesn't include origin or producing country. It doesn't say anything about post-harvest processing. It says nothing about all that stuff. We can decouple 100%, right, the term craft. Now, what we might from commodity, and we could say I am a craft chocolate maker, right? So every bean, every batch, right, is an opportunity for a new flavor expression. Every batch represents a new flavor potential because of the chemistry. And I can use specialty beans or I can use commodity beans. Doesn't matter, right? To some extent, the large industrial maker, and this is why industrial may be a better term, is, if they take specialty beans and the goal is to make it the same from harvest to harvest to harvest, are they truly expressing the potential of the specialty beans if the goal is to make it the same every single time? Right? But more importantly, we're not talking about single origin. We're not talking about two ingredient. We're not talking about any of these other terms, which are not. So is a craft chocolate maker always a 2-ingredient maker? No. Are they always a 3-ingredient maker? Are they always using beans from a single origin? Why? Right? That's not a part of it. Just take Occam's razor and start carving away all of these things which are not right necessary to get to the core definition. And the reason why, again, is that by getting to this clarity and precision of word usage, right? What we can do is, as an industry, what we can do is we can start communicating to consumers in a way, to our customers, in ways that do not cause confusion. And so I'm not trying to, as somebody in that r/chocolate making Reddit post said, I'm not trying to, pigeonhole the creative process. Not at all, right? What I'm talking about, how do I go about and communicate, right, without confusion, so that you and I and you and your customers, right, can just put aside all this question about you use this word and you mean something entirely different from what I mean. And so what we need to do is we need to spend the first part of the conversation saying, are we talking about the same thing? Right? So, again, ethics, right? What is ethical sourcing? It's about doing no harm, right? And how do you implement this concept of doing no harm into the work that you do? Environmental concerns may be the most important for you. And so that's your individual ethical/moral take on the notion of ethics, which are social and societal. And by the way, I looked up dictionaries of philosophy about this to say, what are the differences between ethics and morals? And it seems to be that, ethics are social and morals are individual. So just a quick way to do this. So how you as a company discuss these things is your stance on this. And you may decide that, our definition of ethics says we're not going to exploit labor. We're not going to exploit the environment. We're not going to take unfair advantage, right? So it's a really, really simple way to think about things, and that's where we want to get to. When I talk about sustainable, the simple definition for me that makes the most sense is I am going to manage the farm, right? And this includes the people and the supporting independent ecosystems, the social infrastructure. The farmer doesn't live alone. The farmer exists in a community. We're going to manage those resources in ways so that everything is healthy and thriving 100 years from now. That's what sustainable means, right? And, I'm going to implement sustainability in different contexts because there are different requirements. I'm not going to have a one-size-fits-all. This is what sustainable means, right? And we can take this, I've just described everything in the 17 UN SDGs, right? So there is an overarching definition of sustainability, which is resources are managed so that everything is healthy and thriving 100 years from now. And what is the impact on the local ecosystems of rivers, right? So I have fish and other forms of wildlife, which I need to consider, birds, right? Pollinating insects. Let's get to these simple definitions, right? Which make it possible to really have substantive conversations which move everything forward. And that's why I want to start thinking about this. So before we finish, in the September newsletter, if you are a member, I do start doing some of this work. Commodity bulk cocoa is cocoa that can produce only straightforward cocoa and chocolate flavors. Specialty cocoa is also called fine flavor cocoa, and in Spanish, cacao fino y de aroma, right, is cocoa that can produce fruity, floral, spices, and flavors other than straightforward cocoa and chocolate. We have this really, really simple definition, right? When we talk about a specialty chocolate maker uses specialty cocoa beans to make specialty chocolate. Yay, very simple. There's this one-to-one correspondence. We're not conflating ideas like a specialty chocolate maker can't use more than 200 tons of beans or a year, or they can't use a melanger that's bigger than 50 kilograms. None of that makes any sense whatsoever. We've got simple decisions, and specialty chocolate is any chocolate made with specialty cocoa beans. Why? For one thing, it leverages support from existing frameworks. It mirrors the definitions of specialty coffee, right? And we do have support in terms of the Cacao of Excellence for implementing this kind of system. And so it just makes an enormous amount of practical sense. No, number one, again, I'm not trying to pigeonhole the creative process. I'm not trying to get to very, very precise definitions. I'm searching for clarity because clarity will reduce confusion. I'm going to leave it there. There are a whole bunch of resources that you can get to on the post for today's episode, links to other episodes of Pod Safe Chocolate, other writing that I've done, links to the external sites that I've been talking about. Unfortunately, the way the Perplexity AI works, I can't share the link for this page. So I can't actually give you all of these things. I can't actually share the link to this page that I can use and see. But what I will do if I can is maybe I will take I'll capture the entire page and I can put the page into a gallery on the website. And so you can, I'll see if I can do that. I may not be able to, but if I can, I certainly will. Because I think it might make sense for you to think about what these definitions are. All right. Before we go, because we're a little bit past time, number one, from Mark, they submitted 3 bars to the International Chocolate Awards: caramel passion fruit and tahini sesame. Okay, so those are 3 different bars. There's a caramel bar, a passion fruit bar, and a tahini sesame bar. Now, if I recall, Mark, the tahini sesame bar was in the Craft Chocolate Challenge for 2024. I think you submitted there. All right, they all made the grand jury finals. Congratulations, and you won bronze for the passion fruit. Participating was an educational experience. So one of the things, hey, Mark, if you're still online here, one of the things that I think might be fun is let's do an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate sometime between now and the middle of October, and let's talk about the experience of because you say it was an educational experience. Let's do an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate where you talk about the experience. I think that would be very cool. Maybe I can get somebody from the somebody who is Academy of Chocolate Award winner, or maybe we'll get a couple of award winners, and we'll think about that as and maybe also a Craft Chocolate Challenge Award winner. Talk about that. I think it'd be, but if you're interested, number one, love to do it, and congratulations on the bronze. And just a quick shout out to Mike at Encore Coffee. One of the things that coffee has, one of the things that beer has, is they have this really interesting supportive community. And it turns out that in the worlds of chocolate, we don't have the same thing. And so Mike, giving a shout out to Mark and the work that they're doing is part of building the community. And to the extent that I can help facilitate that, I am really excited to do that. And then Mark, 100% agree with the process for coming up with the definition. Thanks for the effort. And, thank you for acknowledging that. Again, I have been a professional writer since 1984. And from 1984 through to 2002, my focus was on subjects in high technology: computer graphics, interactive multimedia, high definition television. I wrote the first book on high definition television production, which was published in 1996. I mean, that was my move. That's what I did, taking very complex subjects, trying to break them down and trying to present them to people in language that was accessible to them, which often meant that I needed to have multiple ways to describe the same thing. So depending upon where the listener was coming from, where the audience was coming from, I would be able to get my points across, right, to different audiences who needed to have the information in slightly different ways. And that's the background. That's what I bring to, that's the history that I bring to thinking about chocolate and cocoa. My goal, these are very, very complicated topics. Some of this is actually going to be process work that I'm going through for the October 25th presentation I'm going to be doing in Brussels to the British Society of Flavorists, talking about quantifying the flavors of cocoa and chocolate. So an interesting topic. I'll put a link to that. I believe they might be sold out. There may be one spot left, but if you're going to be in Brussels or anywhere near there on the 25th of October, go ahead and see if you can do that. There are going to be a bunch of really interesting tastings. One, David Nilsson is be doing a chocolate and beer pairing. So I had David on as a guest. He runs the Bean to Barstool podcast. He was a big guest here on The Chocolate Life. And Spencer Hyman of Cocoa Runners is going to be doing a tasting as well. So it's going to be a really, really interesting day in Brussels. And with that, I want to say 2 things. Number one is that this coming Tuesday, I am going to be having an interview with Dustin Cornett, who's one of the founders of the Midwest Craft Chocolate Challenge. Now, that festival takes place the week end before Thanksgiving. It's going to be in Rushville, Indiana, and we're going to be talking with Dustin about the festival plans, what's going on, who's going to be participating, and if you're interested in participating, what that means and how you can contribute. So that's going to be happening this coming Tuesday. I also want to say that on October 4th, and this was something that was confirmed this morning, I'm going to be having a conversation with Fernando Crespo about Ecuadorian cocoa and CCN 51 in particular. So I first met Fernando in Ecuador in 2003 on a University of Chocolate trip. I visited twice, I believe, to the Hacienda San Jose, which is the family farm. Fernando's family has a direct connection to the popularization of CCN 51. There's a really fascinating article that was published in Cocoa Runners. This will be in the post for that episode. About CCN 51 and some things. I'm actually using some of the language in my British Society of Flavorists talk, I've decided. So we're going to be talking about, Ecuador and CCN 51. We may also bring in some of these new fermentations that people are talking about, some new varieties, talking about the T800 series from INEAP. So it's going to be interesting. And, Fernando has this direct family connection to the history of CCN 51. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. And then finally, I want to say, put it in your calendar, but on October 15th, I'm going to be having a conversation with Rowan Jacobson. Now, Rowan has been a guest here he was on the Chocolate Life Live. He was doing a podcast series around wild chocolate. I've known Rowan, since 2008. His book and my book were both finalists in the 2008 IACP, which is the International Association of Culinary Professionals Book Award. We were both finalists in the technical and reference section. That's how we were first introduced. We've stayed in touch. And he has a new book. And this book is called Wild Chocolate. Right now, it's available for pre-order on Amazon. And I may put a link to it now. But it's not going to be released until the 8th of October. And so 1 week after the official publication release of Wild Chocolate, Rowan is going to be a guest here on Pod Save Chocolate, and we're going to be talking about the book and his experiences, which is again the subtitle of the book, Across the Americas in Search of Cacao's Soul. You can't see it here. I'm hoping I get this image, but right there is this image of Rowan standing in front of cacao tree. That cacao tree is, I believe, on the Hacienda Tranquilidad in the Atenas region of Bolivia. I have a picture of me standing in front of exactly that same tree, I think. So it's really, really cool to get that. I'm going to read the book between now and then. I'm really looking forward. Rowan's a fabulous writer. If you don't know his work, you need to get his work. His book on the geography of the oyster is really fascinating, right? If you love oysters, you can find the book. And I will, if it's still available on Amazon, I'll put a link to it. So you can purchase it. So all sorts of cool and interesting stuff. I just wanted to let everybody know about, I'm really excited about getting all those episodes together. And with that, I want to say it's Friday when this episode is being recorded. So I wish that everybody has a great weekend. And until the next time, remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Ciao, everyone. Like the episode, thumbs up, join the Chocolate Life, become a member. If you have the resources to become a premium member and support the work we're doing, absolutely love it. Obviously, no need to it. But until the next time,